Orks! As somebody who likes plastic fantasy miniatures and both spending and saving money at the same time, I've wanted a Warhammer 40,000 Combat Patrol since the dawn of time. After getting a box of Storm Boys for Christmas, I knew that I wanted to dive in with some good old-fashioned Orks, knowing full well that any Space Marines I was to buy would simply go on the pile of shame with the rest of the Leviathan box set. However, as somebody who is looking to get into Warhammer 400,000 in the year of our Lord 2024, I did have some initial concerns. The Orks Combat Patrol box was first released in 2021, during a time when Warhammer was still clinging to the rules of 9th edition, and even the Combat Patrol game mode had yet to go through various balance changes. With this in mind, I've dared to ask the unthinkable question: is the Orks Combat Patrol box still worth buying in the modern era? The answer is I hope so. Because I own it now. And if it's not worth it, then fuck. To start things off, let's take a look at all of the models you get inside the box itself. The majority of the 25 models contained within the box are the 20 Ork Boys, or as they're delightfully called in Spanish, boys. Taking up the majority of plastic inside the box, on the other hand, are the 3 Death Copters, 1 Death Dread, and 1 War Boss in Mega Armor, along with his little ride-along buddy. While other combat patrols, like the World Eaters, the Astra Militara, might have more units inside the box, the inclusion of the vehicles does add some variety, and stops the box from just having a bunch of little dudes in there. I mean, the box is mostly dudes, but at the very least, they're jacked as hell. Anyway, without further ado, let's bust this shit open and see what's inside. After flicking through the instruction manual, everything seemed fairly straightforward. If you've ever built a Warhammer set before, all of the pieces inside are labeled and numbered as you'd expect them to be, to make the construction process real straightforward. All of the models inside are also push-fit models, which means they have those little pegs and holes that you can stick together without using any glue at all. But speaking as somebody who's had to transport Space Marines over state lines, you're gonna want to use the glue. I was also happy to see that the Death Dread even had some customization options, which let you pick and choose how the final model looked. I am a sucker for having customization options with my minis, and I love having extra pieces that I can use to kit bash with other models later. All of the bases also had these pre-cut holes, which help you fix the final models to the base without using any glue. And finally, for your convenience, here's all the individual bits of plastic that come inside the box that I promise I'm going to recycle later. The box also comes with a transfer sheet, which allows you to put clan markings on your orcs if that is a thing that is of interest to you. However, I couldn't help but notice it was the exact same transfer sheet that comes with pretty much any other box of orcs. For comparison, here's the transfer sheet that I got in my box of 5 Storm Boys, and as you can see, they're exactly the same. I couldn't help but compare the transfer sheet from the Combat Patrol box to the transfer sheet that I got in the Leviathan box set, which, as you can see, is much bigger. One could argue that the Leviathan box comes with 2 armies, but the transfer sheet is only usable with the Space Marines, since the Tyranids don't really give a shit about branding. Now, one thing I immediately noticed as I opened the box was that since all of the models inside were push-fit, that meant they could only be put together a very particular way. Most of the Ork Boys were made of about 3 to 5 pieces. 2 sides of a torso, a limb, and a head that was usually connected to a shoulder or an arm, sometimes even a gun. I'm somebody who likes to kit bash my models, so I could see how some people could see this as a problem. So in order to test things out, I decided to put together some of the boys to see how they all fit together. The first thing I noticed as I started putting this together was that many of the pieces and instructions were repeated, meaning many of the Ork Boys would end up having an identical twin, with the exception of some of the larger boys and those wielding heavy weapons. I also found that it was actually quite difficult to push the pieces together perfectly, meaning the mold lines were pretty visible where the parts connected. I felt like I didn't have as much of a problem with this with the Space Marines of the Leviathan set, but it kinda makes sense when you're comparing robotic space armor to very physical meat and muscle. All in all, it's not a huge problem, and one you can probably very easily fix with green stuff. Or in my case, just an extra glob of plastic glue. Now for this second model, I wanted to try and use one of the extra heads I got in my Storm Boy set, since I had a whole bunch of those left over. But as you can see here, the hole on his shoulders is pretty big, and is designed to be filled with a specific headpiece that also has a little bit of neck meat on it. So when I tried to judge how I could affix the Storm Boy head, I couldn't really do it without leaving a huge hole in the model. Eventually, I found a variant of the model that could accommodate the kit bashed head, but it's very clear to me that not every design of the boys can accommodate these extra pieces. Some heads have arms attached to them, some arms have torsos attached to them, and this just makes it very difficult to mix and match pieces with sets you might already own. However, this is to be expected from an added value box set. Plus, with a bit of creativity, glue, and a handy pair of pliers, anything's possible. So the models are great and just about as orky as you'd expect. But how good are these pieces in 10th edition Warhammer 40k? First of all, like all the Combat Patrol boxes, this is not a full army. The units inside only comprise about 480 points of a 10th edition Warhammer army, with most of that being attributed to the boys and the Death Dread. Whilst the units contained in the set are fairly standard orcish staples, it's interesting to note that the Warboss in Mega Armor is a leader unit. However, it cannot lead any of the units contained within the Combat Patrol. If you want to use the Warboss's Might is Right feature, you're gonna have to buy a pack of Mega Knobs separately. Alternatively, if your opponent allows it, you could proxy the Warboss in Mega Armor as just a regular Warboss. His stats make him a little bit more squishy, but you will then be able to use the Might is Right feature with your squad of boys. It's important to note that the Warboss in Mega Armor and the Warboss have different sized bases, but this just means your proxied Warboss might be a slightly larger target who's a little harder to maneuver. All in all, if you wanted to build a 1000 point Orc army to play a full game of 40k, you'd probably need to buy this Combat Patrol box twice, alongside a leader unit for your boys like a Pain Boy, or a Weird Boy, or a Goth Rocker proxied in as a Weird Boy. Or you can be like me and buy a Dackerjet for some reason. I got both of these in a Boxing Day sale, so it was real good value. I'm happy with my purchases. Speaking of good value, the Ork Combat Patrol box is insanely good value for these units in particular. If we're looking at the prices of these units in USD, altogether they'd bring up a total value of $265. Considering the Combat Patrol box from Games Workshop is $160 and never goes on sale, not even once, that's a total savings of 105 US American true blue bona fide dollars. If we compare these prices to the likes of a more recent Combat Patrol like the Necron box, which only saves you $38, we can see that the Orc box is actually insanely good value. All in all, the Ork Combat Patrol box gives you some great starting pieces to get started in 10th edition Warhammer 400,000. It also takes care of most of your smaller battle line units, leaving you to choose whatever big fun units you want to include as the centerpiece for your army, like a Gorkanaut, or a Dackerjet. Anyway, moral of the story, I like this box and I'm gonna have a lot of fun building my fun little green guys. 4 stars.